Hey everyone, and welcome to RUBIN'S Mind Lab, where we break down the latest research into what it really means. Ever wondered why some people with schizophrenia feel like everything is about them, even when it is not? Or why that intense feeling can lead to paranoia? Well, this new study dives deep into those very questions, exploring how our brains process information and why that process can go a bit awry in schizophrenia. Imagine your brain as a detective constantly gathering clues to make decisions. For people with schizophrenia, this detective work, especially when it comes to social stuff, seems to get a little confused. This study wants to figure out how that information gathering process is different, and if those differences are specific to social situations, or if they're just general brain glitches. So, what's the big puzzle they're trying to solve? They know that people with schizophrenia have trouble figuring out if social cues, like someone's gaze, are directed at them. This is super important for understanding others and avoiding paranoia, but is this problem a broad issue affecting all kinds of thinking, or is it a specific problem with understanding social, and especially self-related? Information, that's the million-dollar question. To tackle this, the researchers had people with and without schizophrenia perform a few different tasks. They looked at how people decided if a face in a picture was looking directly at them, that is the self-referential social stuff. Then, they looked at how people decided the gender of a face, which is social but not directly about you. And finally, they had people do a puzzle involving integrating basic visual shapes, which is not social at all. They used a fancy computer model called a drift diffusion model to see how people were making their decisions. Think of this drift diffusion model, or DDM for short, as a way to watch the brain's decision-making detective at work. It looks at how quickly and how carefully someone gathers evidence before making a choice. The model gives us little clues, like how efficiently information is being gathered, or if the detective has a natural bias towards one conclusion. The researchers actually gave participants 3 different tasks. The first was a gaze detection task, where they had to tell if a face was looking at them. This is testing that self-referential social processing. The second task was a facial gender identification task, where they just had to say if a face was male or female. This is non-self-referential social processing. The third was a visual integration task, where they had to tell which way a pattern of dots was pointing. This is your basic, non-social general perceptual processing. By having people do all 3, they could compare how the brain's evidence gathering worked across these different types of challenges. Now, what did they find when they looked at the results? It's pretty fascinating. First, when it came to figuring out if a face was looking at you, the people with schizophrenia were less able to adjust their thinking based on the actual gaze in the picture. Their drift sensitivity was lower. This means their brain wasn't picking up the visual clues about eye contact as well as the control group. But here is where it gets specific. When it came to judging someone's gender, their drift sensitivity was also lower. This means that noticing social cues, whether they're about you or just general social information, was harder for people with schizophrenia. However, when it came to the completely non-social visual task, the visual integration task, their drift sensitivity was pretty much the same as the control group. This is a key finding. It suggests the problem isn't with basic visual processing for everyone with schizophrenia. It is more specific to processing social information. Now, let's talk about biases. Remember how the detective might have a hunch? Well, the study found that people with schizophrenia had a stronger drift bias, specifically in the eye contact task. This means they were more likely to jump to the conclusion that someone was looking at them, even when the evidence wasn't that strong. This tendency to overthink social cues as being about you was only present in the self-referential task. It wasn't there for judging gender or for the visual task. This is huge because it separates 2 different problems. One is a general difficulty in picking up social cues, lower sensitivity in both social tasks. And the other is a specific bias to interpret those cues as self-relevant, higher bias only in the eye contact task. So, how does this all tie into paranoia? The researchers found that the less sensitive people with schizophrenia were to social information in both the eye contact and gender tasks. The more paranoid they tended to be. This connection was specifically with social processing. The visual integration task sensitivity, which is non-social, didn't show this link to paranoia. This is really important. It suggests that paranoia in schizophrenia might be fueled by a broader difficulty in accurately reading social situations, leading to misinterpretations. If your brain isn't good at picking up subtle social signals, you might fill in the gaps with assumptions. And those assumptions can easily become fearful or suspicious, especially if you have a tendency to think things are about you. What's particularly interesting is that the bias they found in the eye contact task, the tendency to think people are looking at you, didn't directly predict paranoia in this study. Instead, it was the lack of sensitivity in picking up social cues more generally that predicted paranoia. This hints that paranoia might stem more from an inability to accurately grasp social reality, rather than just an overactive self-referential filter, though that filter certainly plays a role in how those misinterpretations manifest. They also checked if these links to paranoia were just because of general thinking problems, not specifically social ones. They compared the social task results to the non-social visual task results and a general cognitive ability score. Even after accounting for these general factors, the link between poor social information processing and paranoia remained strong. This really points to a specific mechanism driving paranoia in schizophrenia. So, what does this all mean for us? For people with schizophrenia, it highlights that problems with social perception, especially how clearly they can read social cues, are strongly linked to paranoia. It's not just a random symptom, it seems to be tied to a specific way their brain is processing information. This study suggests that when we think about helping people with schizophrenia, we might need to focus on improving their ability to accurately process social information. If their brain is better at picking up the real social signals from others, they might be less likely to misinterpret them in a way that leads to paranoia. The researchers also noted something interesting about the drift bias in the eye contact task. They found it was a processing bias, meaning it affected how information was actually analyzed, rather than just an initial response bias, which is like a gut feeling before the evidence really comes in. This is a technical but important distinction because it tells us where in the decision making process the problem lies, which could be crucial for designing targeted therapies. One of the limitations they mentioned is that while they found associations between social processing and paranoia, in people with schizophrenia, these links weren't as clear in the control group. This is likely because paranoia is much less common and less varied in people without schizophrenia, so it is harder to see the same patterns. They also felt they might need larger sample sizes to really nail down some of the subtler findings, especially regarding social cognition. For future research, it would be really interesting to see if interventions that train people to better read social cues, or perhaps even therapies that help manage expectations about what social cues mean, can reduce paranoia. Also understanding if the problems in social processing are completely separate from general thinking problems, or if they overlap more than we think is a key direction. So, what's my take on this? This study does a fantastic job of breaking down a really complex process decision-making and showing us that the way our brains process social information, especially self-relevant social information, is super important and can be quite different in schizophrenia. The clear link they found between poor social information processing and paranoia, while not seeing that link for non-social tasks, is a powerful finding. It suggests that targeting social perception might be a key avenue for reducing paranoid thoughts in schizophrenia. They've used some really clever modeling to get at these subtle differences, which is exciting for the field. The main strength here is the clear separation of different processing mechanisms and their specific links to symptoms. A potential weakness is that, as they mentioned, the findings about social cognition weren't as strong, possibly due to sample size. But overall, this paper gives us a deeper, more mechanistic understanding of how some of the most distressing symptoms of schizophrenia might arise. Thanks for joining me on RUBIN'S Mind Lab. If you found this breakdown helpful, please give this video a thumbs up, leave a comment with your thoughts, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss our next dive into the fascinating world of the mind.